Hey friends, I hope you're doing well. Today I thought that I would go back to some of the basics in Inkscape. There can be some confusion about saving out of Inkscape versus exporting out of Inkscape, and we're going to talk about the details surrounding that idea. When you are working in Inkscape, you have the ability to save your work to an SVG where all of the components and images and work that you do there with nodes is all saved. But when you're sharing with other people, it's important to have an exported PNG or some other file type that can be used in email, websites, and other places, because SVG can work in some cases, but often does not. Also, it's good to hold on to your SVG file and your PNG export separately, because one is really for working and one is really for sharing. So let's go into Inkscape and look at the differences between those two file types and discuss saving versus exporting. So here we are in Inkscape. We're looking at a blank page. I'm going to create some shapes. Using my rectangle tool, I'm going to create a shape here, and I'm going to use my selection tool, and I'm going to show you a shortcut for making many shapes at one time that are identical. If I use my selection tool and select this object and move it around, every time while I'm holding on to that shape that I hit the space bar, it makes a duplicate of that shape. So this is just so that we have something to work with. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the first item, I'll make it red, select the second item, make it a different red. So we have these objects on this page, and I want to be able to preserve the work that I've done. So of course, I'm going to click on Save, and I'm going to click on Projects. I'm going to go into a folder, and I'm going to name it Saving versus Exporting .svg, and I'll click on Save. So what this means is I have all of the work that I've done so far preserved in that SVG file. If there's somebody else who is working with Inkscape or some other SVG compatible application, I can send that SVG to them and they can continue the work from this point. That's very beneficial. Even more beneficial than that, it saves it for me. If I decide that I want to come in later and make a change to this, I can come in and not have to redo this work to get to this point. Whereas, if I am sharing a file on the web or social media or in a poster or some other place, SVG is not the best choice for that because not all applications understand and work with SVG. Whereas a PNG is a much more common file type and holds on to a lot less information. So this SVG that I've saved does not work for those applications. What I have to do in that case is I have to click on the export dialog, and when this dialog comes up, it gives me some options. I can choose to export the entire document, which means anything that has been saved in the surface would be exported as an image. If I choose page, it saves and exports anything that is within this white area in Inkscape. If I choose selection, it would only export what is selected on the page. And then there is custom, where you can choose a specific point to start and stop your area of export on your page. So I'm going to use page in order to export. And you can see it gives you a preview down here. It shows that there's going to be a transparent background and there's going to be these 9 objects that are a part of your image. Okay? And it also gives me a suggestion for where to save that. And because I saved it as an SVG called Saving versus Exporting, it uses that as a suggestion for the name of the PNG as well. Usually, you want to have similar names between your SVG and your PNG so that later when you're looking through your files, you have some correlation between the work file and the share file. Okay? You can also choose different types of files to export as, such as a JPEG or a TIFF or a PDF. I personally think PNG is a great image format, so I'm going to use PNG, and I'm going to click on Export, and immediately that export is finished. There is not a dialog that has popped up to tell me that the export is finished. It went by so quick. And so as a result, if you were to click Export again, it would say a file named saving versus exporting.png already exists because the export was successful. And it's warning me before I overwrite that with a new file. So I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to close my dialog. Here I am in my Design for the Non-Designer folder where I have the SVG, which we know is the work file that holds on to all of our node information, etc., and our PNG. So if I open up this SVG in Inkscape, I can continue the work that I'm doing. Whereas, if I open up this PNG, let's say with an image viewer, you can see here's our transparent background and our 9 objects exported as an image. But I can't select these items in order to change them, because this is not an SVG file, this is a PNG file. It's just pixels. In fact, we'll go further. If I go back to my SVG, inside of Inkscape, here it is, and now let's import that image, which is something that you can do. I'm going to choose to import this saving versus exporting.png. I click on Open. And this dialog is very interesting. It asks you whether or not you want to embed or link the image inside of your SVG file. You can contain the entirety of an image inside of an SVG file. I usually do that because that way, if I make a change to the image later, it does not affect the contents of my SVG file. So I'm going to choose embed. If you choose link, what happens is it will refer to that PNG file or whatever other image that you decide to import. And the only downside to that is that if you change the location of that image file, it will become lost inside of the SVG file. This is a lot of information, I understand. In my opinion, as a beginner with this concept, you will probably want to choose embed versus link. You can also choose to get the dots per inch from the file or use the default import resolution. I usually use the default. And then there are these rendering modes. I'm going to choose auto. And now when I click on OK, I have the image file floating on top of my objects from the original. So this is a very interesting thing. What we're looking at is the original set of rectangle shapes that we created and a PNG export all in the same space. And although they look identical, they are not. For example, if I decide to, I can click on this object and you can see the handles show up around that object because this is a rectangle shape in Inkscape, part of an SVG. Whereas here, if I click on this PNG, it selects the entire image. None of the information about those individual objects is retained in that image. All that is retained in that image is whether or not a pixel is there or not the lines that make up a shape, not the nodes that make up a shape, or any other aspect of the work that we do in Inkscape specifically. All it is a rendering of the work that we did in the SVG. So you can see you would be stuck if you only held on to the PNG, because you wouldn't be able to continue the work with those individual shapes in the PNG. You can only do that in an SVG. Hopefully, by talking about all these concepts, we have a better understanding of the reason that you want to save to SVG and export to PNG in order to hold on to both sides of the design work that you do. That being the creation versus the sharing. So, I hope that this allows for some clarity around the kind of saving and exporting that you do in Inkscape and why you would do that. If you have any questions about it, I would love to hear about it. If you have a special situation where this doesn't make sense and you need to be able to accomplish something that hasn't been covered in this video, I would love to talk with you about it. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're warm. I hope you're well fed. I hope you're breathing easily. And I hope you're well. Bye.